Our team has been investigating Russian war crimes since 2023. And we decided to establish this very special unit because, on the one hand, we witnessed huge demand from international audience to understand what is happening in occupied territories and what the situation with human rights violation in Ukraine and about the Russian war crimes. On the other hand, at some moment we realized that scale of Russian atrocities in Ukraine is huge. According to Ukrainian law enforcement, more than 200,000 war crimes were committed by the Russian soldiers in Ukraine. Realize more than 200,000 war crimes. It's really terrible. Our team works with the most brutal Russian war crimes like deportation, militarization, sexual violence, attacks on Ukrainian culture, torture and mistreatment of Ukrainian POWs, crimes against civilians. And I can say that film about militarization is our third film about crimes against children. It was one of our main direction of our work to show our international audience the situation with human rights violations against Ukrainian kids. And of course, when Olesia came up with this topic, we discussed it and decided that it's very important. Olesia will tell more about it, but when I heard about this topic first time, for me there was something about brainwashing. I realized that it's very important, but I'm as Ukrainian journalist, investigative journalist and editor, I wasn't able to realize the real scale of militarization. And when Olesia showed me first time this footages, this video from games, I was really shocked. Because we're talking not about brainwashing, we're talking about real military training when Ukrainian children, Ukrainian teenagers are learning how to handle with weapons, how to operate drones, how to dig trenches, and for me it's terrible, and for us it's very important to present this documentary to you.
Thank you. And please, over to you, Olesia. Could you tell us a bit about the idea on this project and how you developed it into a documentary with also such a short time, during such a short time period?
Yes, the first time when I discovered this topic, it was in 2023 when we just launched our War Crimes Investigations Unit, and I started my work on the documentary about deportation of Ukrainian children from Mariupol in the Donetsk region to Russia. We were focused at that time on one group of children, of 30 children, who were deported under the guise of rehabilitation to Russia. They were promised to be returned in 2 weeks, but almost all of them ended up in Russian orphanages and in Russian families. And at that time I discovered that it wasn't the only crime against children in the occupied territories. Russian authorities, militaries, they doing a lot and invest a lot of resources to Russificate, indoctrinate and militarize our children. And I was shocked as well as Yevheniia about the scale of this crime, and that we, even in Ukraine, do not pay enough attention to this crime. Because almost all of us, and every time when we come somewhere abroad, people know about deported children and that all the world should help Ukraine to retrieve them. But 600,000 of Ukrainian children, they are school-aged and they are staying in the occupied territories, and they are victims of militarization and indoctrination.
And how did you get in touch with these children or these young people who are so important witnesses to this?
As you see, all of them escaped from the occupied territories, and some of them, when we conducted our interviews, some of them moved to the territory that is under control of Ukraine only a few months ago. And of course, they still have trauma. They worked with a psychologist, and that family, was the main characters of this documentary. It was very dangerous for them to stay in the occupied territories, but at the same time it was dangerous for them to leave occupied territories, because parents of the children, they supported Ukrainian army, and during more than 3 years of the occupation they speak Ukrainian. Of course, they didn't have an opportunity to explain their children what is going on in Ukraine. But it's always a challenge for us to find subjects of our documentaries. And yes, we need to wait until people leave occupied territories. And it's also not an easy process. They need to cross a lot of borders and checkpoints. They need to go through filtration, and they need to go through Russia to come to, at the end of the day, to come to Ukraine. And Oksana is a unique witness, because Russia is doing everything not to let those children leave occupied territories, because she's a resource for their future army, and they already invested a lot in her. And there are only a couple of children who went through these military camps in Russia and had a chance to escape from occupation.
And you've talked to, of course, others as well on the topics of how children handle and the youth handle living in occupied areas. What would you say is, I mean, we've seen some of it described here, of course, but what would you say is the overall topics which they bring up when they discuss, when they have been released or when they have come back to Ukraine?
You mean about the conditions in the occupied territories? They're always under the pressure and under the control of occupied authorities, and for families with children it's even harder, because teachers in schools, they control their children, and you always need to control what are you talking about with your children at home. Otherwise, they can come to school and say to their teacher, you told me some false things, and that means that representatives from the family social services will come to that families and will check them. And we know about the cases when parents ended up in Russian detention centers, and their children were taken to orphanages. So you don't have an opportunity to tell what is your real position, what do you think, what is your position about the war, about occupation, Russian authorities, and so on. And it seems like that in the occupied territories everything is fine, but that's because we do not have enough information about what is going on there. We do not have sources in the occupied territories, because we understand that it's dangerous for them to connect with Ukrainian journalists and to share any information. So the only way for us is to wait until people leave those territories.
Going back to you, Yevheniia, education is very central here, both when it comes to being a tool used to oppress Ukrainians, but it's also used as a form of resistance, which we could see here when one of the children log on to a Ukrainian speaking school and participate to some extent in a Ukrainian learning community. What are your thoughts on this? How important is education?
You mean education in Ukraine?
Yes, I mean, because what we've seen in the documentary here is that education is weaponized and used by Russia as a tool to try to change young Ukrainians' identities. But we could also see it also here demonstrated as a use, as a sign of resistance, when, for instance, children still participate through digital tools that sometimes, when it's possible, keeping in touch with the Ukrainian education system. So could you say something, could you expand on the role of education? How important it is?
Yeah, of course, education is very important for young Ukrainians and for children. And I can say that family under occupation who decided to continue studying in Ukrainian school online are very brave people also, because as Olesia mentioned, it's very dangerous. And when representatives of Russian authorities come to their home, come to their apartments and check conditions, check some maybe views of family, in the case when they identify that some children continue to study in Ukrainian school, parents would have real problem. And these families are threatened, blackmailed by Russian representatives. But for families, it's very important to keep this Ukrainian identity. Olesia explained that it's dangerous, it's difficult, but a lot of people under Russian occupation see their future in Ukraine. And a lot of them are waiting for Ukrainian armed forces in Kherson region, in Donetsk region, in Crimea. And all of them, not all of them, but significant part of them put a lot of effort to keep this Ukrainian views of their kids, to keep this Ukrainian identities. We know some cases when some young Ukrainians who decided to escape from Russia or occupied territories return home, return to the territory under Ukrainian controls, and they're very happy now. Maybe, of course, it's very dangerous to be under permanent attacks by drone missiles in Kyiv, for instance, or another Ukrainian big cities. But on this other hand, they feel more safe because there is their land, because they can be protected by their government, their army, and they can share their views, their thoughts openly, because there is their motherland.
Thank you. I'd like to ask you now, Anastasiia, you are the executive producer of this documentary, and you've now, together with the group, traveled, and with this documentary you are actually also educating different audiences in different countries. Is the documentary format itself an important language for journalists?
Yeah, thank you for this question. Definitely it is important because I think first of all we see the rise of video, especially now. Of course we can see the rise of short video, but here we have an opportunity to apply a certain way of storytelling, and we have been just talking about it today earlier, that we have produced so far I think 12 documentaries, and in a span of 3 years, and that means, and also the war has been going on for 4 years now, and unfortunately I have to say that the war fatigue is very high, and both within Ukrainian audience, but also especially outside of Ukraine. So every time we have to produce the documentary, we have to reinvent ourselves in a way and find ways how to show and tell the story, not just in a ways that are ethical, you know, that are like showing the scale of the story, but in those ways that would also engage as much audiences as we would like, you know. And of course, one of our primarily goals is to make it as understandable and as accessible to the larger amount of people. And sometimes it might be hard because, first of all, you have a lot of background going on with different topics with the war in Ukraine in general, but when you're going into like let's say militarization or history of Crimea or I don't know, even art of Ukraine, you have to explain a lot of details, and sometimes it can get overwhelming. So this is also one of the things that you have to think in mind when you're doing the script. And also in documentary, of course, there's big opportunity to actually give voices, show images of real people, and you could notice that we don't dub our subjects. That's one of the like strategic reasons, like decisions for us, because this is a way to, of course, it's less accessible, for people to hear, like if you can't hear or you don't, or you prefer to hear, not to read the subtitles. But at the same time, it gives an opportunity for the audience to actually like listen to their voices and like try to live through their emotions. And this is also the human touch is one of those ways that help us to like kind of make that storytelling, more persuasive.
And as we heard also in the documentary, there is more focus and more awareness in general on these topics related to children. But what would you say? What are the kind of audiences you would wish to have for this kind of screening?
I mean, of course, our big wish and goal to make as much impact with these documentaries as we can, So, but impact can be done in different ways. But I think if we can persuade people at least to talk about this issue, that's already good. And it can be really any person. When we distribute our documentaries, it's like, of course, you have to be careful with that because we talk a lot about in our documentaries about like tortures and atrocities and violence. So, but like I'm sometimes asked, what are your age audience for the documentary? But also very often we try to, I think my colleagues will agree, we try to tell our in our documentary stories in such a way that it is accessible both to adult audience but also to the young ones in a way, even though the topics are very, very hard. At the same time, of course, we have like documentaries that like, I mean, it's hard to watch even for adults, not even saying about kids.
Thank you. And now I'd like to ask you, Carina, with your line of work and your focus also on these issues, what are your thoughts after having seen this documentary here tonight?
Yes, first of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me here, and also thank you for having made this very important film. I was actually in Berlin in the big German conference, Kyiv conference in February, I think. So I saw this movie for the first time, and it's so touching, and you really get a picture of what is happening. And I think that's so important because even if it's now we are in the 5th year of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, there are still many people not knowing what's happening with the children of Ukraine. So I think it's so important, as you say, we need to raise awareness of this and to make people aware, and also policymakers to make them or us aware of that, because too many people don't know what's happening with the children. And also it's about the deported children. But as you say in the movie, it's 1.5 million children living in the Russian occupied area. So it's extremely important, because this is not only the future of Ukraine, it's these children are Ukraine today, but they are also the future of Ukraine, and they are so important. And that's why Russia is doing what they are doing. This is a very effective weapon in Russia's hand, and it's so extremely important disgusting.
Exactly. And how would you say that the reporting and the general political debate is then? Is it focused on these humanitarian issues, and or they treated separately? Because as I see it, sometimes we have lots and lots of reporting on the war in Ukraine, and it addresses several, of course, very relevant aspects of it. But I also see that when these issues are reported, they tend to be reported in their own line of the reporting, so to say. Do you share this view with me, or?
Yes, that's why your film is so important, and that I, in my role as a special envoy for the Ukrainian children in the Parliamentary Assembly of the OSCE, needs to speak about it and to inform what's happening, and that we claim that we need to have the children on the top of the agenda. We can't speak about any sustainable peace on Ukraine's condition if we don't have the children on top of the agenda. So that's very important.
And could you tell us a bit about more how these different sanctions targeting these kind of crimes are developing, and perhaps a bit about the focus where it lies at the moment from EU and Sweden being
yes. In the Parliamentary Assembly we have had and discussed about Ukraine for a long time. It started 2014 when the Russia annexation of Crimea, because then deportation and adoption of children started. It wasn't the start of 2022, it started a long time before. So we have had a long time discussion about this, and the Parliamentary Assembly, you know, that's an international organization built on the ruins of the Second World War and also on the Cold War. And we are trying to do what we can. I'm in the Parliamentary Assembly, and then we have the executive side, OSCE, and they can use... OSCE is a consensus organization, but we have a democracy and human rights monitoring tool that is called Moscow mechanism, where we can start and make reports. And it has been several reports on Ukraine since 2022. One was especially about the children, 2023. And now 41 countries, I think, have decided to make a new report to follow up what has happened to the children, but not only the deported children, but also to the children on the occupied area in Ukraine. So what we can do in the Parliamentary Assembly, we can make decisions, make declarations, we can put our opinion to the executive side where the foreign ministers are meeting, and we have a permanent council in Vienna, and they have a meeting every week with the OSCE ambassadors in Vienna. And then we also need to work not only in the OSCE. I need to work in my parliament here in Sweden and to build opinion, if that's the correct word, to mention the children, and so we have it all the time on the agenda. If that was an answer to your question.
Yes, well, thank you. Yes, and also relating to the organizations, the Russian entities and individuals who are named in the documentary here, is there anyone who could comment on the more recent changes from the EU sanctions targeting more of organizations and individuals? Carina, you or perhaps Eugenia?
Yeah, some of them were were added to the sanction list of the EU. Some of those people whom you sent today. Igor Vorobyov, the head of that branch warrior in Volgograd region, he is now under sanctions of EU. The warrior center is also under sanctions, and that camp Avantgarde as well.
Yes, I think that's very important to be clear about. We need to have or push for more sanctions on Russia. The shadow fleet, the Russian frozen assets. So we need to be very hard and firm and clear on sanctions to Russia, because that's the only way to make Ukraine to win the war, and also to have the children again the top of the agenda.
But with regards to the more specific sanctions here regarding this issue, I know that you should not perhaps be the voices of delivering recommendations or suggestions for future policy, but if you were to represent the policy community, what would you see would be helpful with regards to this? Exceeding these already further developed sanctions.
I can say that we do not, I know that our human rights defenders, they made recommendations whom can be added, included to the sanction list, and they use information from our documentaries as well. We also pass the information to General Prosecutor's Office, to the National Police investigators, and so on. But our main aim is to show the truth and what is going on in Ukraine to you, to our audience, international audience, and we are very happy when we can be useful for human rights defenders and law enforcement, and we are always open to pass all the information from our investigations to them.
I think I can add on here a little bit in terms that when we're talking, sanctions, they can be against one individual, but it also can be against the country, against companies and so on. But when we're talking specifically sanctions against these individuals, we're also very often talking about sanctions in absentia. For example, when they're staying still in Russia and they were put under sanctions, but that means that they have to cross the border, let's say, to actually be prosecuted. So those are trials. They are not, they're not coming to an end with this in absentia thing. And for some people, they will be working when they intercept the border, or they will do something that will lead them to further prosecution. But for many people, I feel it might unfortunately be in a way that they will stay as people in absentia, with suspicion in absentia. I think that's still important, obviously, because we're naming the names, but at the same time, justice can only go so far, it seems like.
Yeah, but I suppose that it's two different routes when the alleged perpetrators can be included in sanction list, and when, for example, the law enforcement investigates the cases when they can be the alleged war criminal and perpetrator. And of course, we had cases when, after our documentaries, law enforcement opened cases, and some of the people that we identified in our documentaries, they have suspicions in absentia, and of course they have a lot of restrictions. They can't cross the EU border, for example. They can't travel through Europe. Now it seems that it's not very important because they can stay for a long time in Russia, but one day I suppose that the suspicion and wouldn't be in absentia, and maybe the main characters of this war will be in trial.
Yeah, and I would like to add that 2 years ago we released our documentary about torture of Ukrainian POWs, and we described situation with human rights in one of the most terrible camp for POWs in occupied territories called Oleniivka. And last year we received requests from the ICC, the International Criminal Court, to share with them all our findings. And of course it's very important for us cooperate and pass our journalistic facts and findings not only to national law enforcement but also to international, because the ICC plays one of the key role in international justice.
Thank you. And now I think we'll leave some time for questions from the audience. Yes.
Yeah. First of all, I will thank you very much for your reporting. I, from personal experience, know that human rights reporting is very demanding mentally and physically, and do great work. I have two questions. Has any of these military-trained youths been sent to the front lines or used in the war against their own people? And two, when the Russians were in Afghanistan, they indoctrinated children, turned them into communists and not Russians, and sent them back as spies and assassins. Has that ever happened in Ukraine with these children?
I can say that we already have documented cases when children that were militarized since 2014, they joined the Russian army and they were killed in the front line. And our General Prosecutor's Office documented those cases. And you saw the example of Anatoly Yushko, the guy from Donetsk who was near 14 years old when Russia occupied his city. He was a schoolboy. He joined the youth army, the military organization for children and youth, and he joined army in 2022. He occupied part of the south of Ukraine, and now he's teaching Ukrainian children how to continue the war, and he's the best example for them.
Thank you. I think there were additional questions there.
Hello, my name is Christopher Frivärld. I am involved in several projects to support Ukraine. One is to support Ukrainian scientists working in Kyiv with revolutionary technology for geological exploration. One other project is to work with NEAO, the new Ukrainian government instrument, to respond to the US administration's proposal and program called US-Ukrainian Mineral Deal, which is very debatable. And the third one is to help various cities in Ukraine, among other Fastiv and Kromorsk, close to Odessa, to rebuild and to create smart, viable cities. When I see the movie, I'm of course affected very much, and I ask what can be done additionally from Sweden to support your message and your vision. And I can see many flashbacks in the movie from the experience of the Second World War, like the fact that very, very few people in Europe were aware of the concentration camps in Germany, and that enabled the Germans to continue these activities very, very long into the war. So I have two proposals to support your vision, hopefully. One is to increase the awareness and information, and maybe one opportunity could be to show this movie on SVT, Swedish government television, to all the population of Sweden, and also to show it in all the Swedish schools to young children and at universities, and maybe also to all the people in the Swedish government that should take action, and not least to all the business sector, because what we see today is a lot of fantastic support from Sweden made by individual companies, even individual persons, driving back and forth to Ukraine with material and whatever they can support with. So the business sector is very reactive and very fast to respond if they just get aware of it. So increasing the awareness is one thing, and the second
You have a
thing.
question?
The second thing is, of course, to enforce the resistance in Ukraine. That was also very important during the Second World War. So my question is, what can be done to increase and strengthen the resistance in Ukraine? And are they anyway involved in destroying or disturbing these activities? That's my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I don't know what you can do from your side to share the documentary with in your communities, with your friends. Becomes a member of the Kyiv Independent. All our documentaries are available on our YouTube channel and on our website. You can find them, and that's the most important for us. Thank you for your proposals. We will also think about that.
Carina, would you like to say something there? Because Sweden do more with regards to this.
Yes, of course, we can always do more, and I'm very proud of that. We are totally united in the Swedish Parliament about the support for Ukraine, and that's very important. I think that we can show it in many places, the film, of course, and we can engage, every one of us, in organizations, NGOs, or just to help, as you say. There are many people going from Sweden to Ukraine with aid and help. So I think we can do something, every one of us, to do that. And I also would like to say, when it comes to the children, it's so easy that the children become a number. Behind every face, behind every number, there is a child, there is a family, and the relatives around them. And children have special rights. They have the UN rights of the child, and that's so important also to remember, because what happens to a child if it will be deported when she or he is 2-3 years old? A day, a week, a month is a lifetime for a child. So it's so important that we really push on to save these children.
Thank you.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for your support, and if you can help us arrange some screening in SVT, please do it. We will appreciate it a lot. Regarding what you can do, first of all, help us to keep attention abroad on Ukrainian topic, because unfortunately we witness this war fatigue, and it's very difficult for us fight with it. And the second point, Olesia said that please support Kyiv Independent, but also you can support some Ukrainian charity organizations and volunteers, because in Ukraine we have a few amazing teams who provide psychological support for kids who return home. We have another volunteers who help families and children to flee Russia and return home. And it's very expensive. Sometimes when we have some speeches abroad, people ask us why this family cannot leave the occupied territories. And we usually explain that sometimes under the occupation, people do not have money to buy bread. It's very expensive for them to pay a few $1,000s to leave occupied territories, because we do not have checkpoint between the territory under Ukrainian control and the occupied territories. People need travel through Russia, through some EU countries, and it's extremely expensive for that. And we have amazing people who can help them. If you has this opportunity, please do it.
I can also add on. I think my colleagues were very extensive in the way you can support Ukraine and so on. But I also think it's important to, when we're in Europe and we're going outside of Ukraine. Well, sometimes now more and more we see across the Europe this theme of why to support Ukraine. That's not the country that we should care about. We should care about our Ukraine. And I think this is a very dangerous thing to say and focus, because it's not just about Ukraine and Ukrainian future. It really affects all of us, and it can go different ways. And I hope that we will have enough a response as a world and as a democratic world, to stop what's going on, but also to preserve the memory of what was going on.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? One last question, exactly.
Hello, Alina Zubkovich, Nordic Ukraine Forum. Thank you very much for preparing this film. It's very important, and the biggest take for me personally is basically the scale of the preparation that Russians do. And also the case with Crimea, that it's actually over 10 years that they're doing this. So it is a very well prepared people, and they will be used. So it seems that they cannot be used en masse in Ukraine on the Ukrainian territories, because the quality of the war is different. But so my question is, when you were talking to your witness, were there any a reference from them, what Russians say about the further invasions? Do they say about invading other European countries? So how do they basically narrate the further wars where these children will be participating? Thank you.
Of course, they do not tell these people directly that the next country that we are going to invade will be, I don't know, some Baltic countries or something like that. But I read a lot of documents of that youth organizations, and the main point of their policy is that the war is a normal stage for the Russian society and for the people from occupied territories. They have the enemy, and they do not give the name of the enemy. They have the enemy, and they should fight against those enemy. And all these children in that youth organizations and in the military camps, they're prepared for the, they're preparing that the war will continue, will be endless. The war had no end, and their main obligation as citizens of Russia is to defend their country.
Thank you. I think that perhaps we should close the talk so far here on the stage and continue afterwards with more individual questions, of course. You will remain here for some time, so it's possible to have further conversations with the group.
We can see that there is one more question, yeah?
Okay, there was one more, please.
I'm sorry, I just want to make an announcement. I'm Stan Bergland from an organization called Refugee Hope, UASC. We support Ukrainian refugees.